I don't know.
Not too many disciples are speechless. Okay, I'll ask you questions and get you started, okay? I want you to tell me who your parents were.
Well, my parents was Edith Brown and Samuel or S.D. Seifel.
What was the full name?
And they were married in Russell by maybe around about 1909 in the Methodist Church. At that time, that was the engineer on the C&O Railroad, and where he hired in, and he hired on the railroad as a fireman about 1901 or 1902. He retired in 1959, and that was the year my mother died from a heart attack. There were 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. I'm the oldest, and my brother Bill, 2 years younger than I.
What's your birth date? What's
February the 18th.
What year?
1911. Bill was born in 1913. That was the year of the big flood. The 1913 flood was probably the largest flood known at that time. Of course, we had the 1937, and that overshadowed everything in reference to floods. And there was Babe, or Edith Emily, and she was the only girl, and then Sam Jr.
Okay, what were their birth dates?
Babe was January the 5th. I don't know exactly. I think she's about 10 or 12 years younger than I am.
She was born in 22.
Mm-hmm.
January of 22.
22. Mm-hmm.
I was born in November of 20.
Yeah. Sam was September the 13th. What year would he be? 24, 25?
Probably later than that, I think.
Do you remember yours? You know?
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember. I was trying to think of.
Well, I'd say that it's in the early 30s, early 20s. We lived at, Bill and I were born in Ashland, Kentucky. Babe was born here in Ohio, here in Ironton. So was Sam. We lived on 207 North 6th Street. Good neighborhood, good neighbors and everything. And that's where we lived and spent our younger lives, and later moved in to various fields and everything. I think Sam was about the only. No, Babe went to Illinois Masonic Hospital in Chicago, and she graduated from there as a nurse. Got married a city fireman. And they had two children, boy and a girl. Is that right? I think so. Sam went to school and he graduated from Penn College in Cleveland. I forget what year Sam wasn't, got married. But anyway, they only had one boy. And his name was, at that time, was Sam Disciple the Third. Sam, my brother Sam was the second, and the original one was our father, or in one instance, Sam the Third's grandfather. My mother died in 1959 of a severe heart attack at home. It was on a Sunday.
Do you know what year she was born?
1890, not sure about this, 1894, 1896. She was born in,
Ashland.
well, I will say Ashland, yeah. My grandfather Brown, he was born in Greenup County, and he worked at the old iron ore furnaces, brickyards. That time they were plentiful, very prominent in the industry that prevailed here in this county of Lawrence. And although he couldn't write his own name, anything that went wrong with the furnace, with those iron ore furnaces, and the iron was running bad, like lack of lime or lack of charcoal or the ingredients that goes into to make a pig of iron. They'd immediately say, well, go get Bill Brown and he'll straighten it out, and he did. But yet he couldn't write his own name. Well, he was a wonderful person, and he had a mustache, chewed Red Horse tobacco. Not very, I suppose he's around what, 5'11", 5'10", he was less than 6 feet, but slender built. My Grandma Brown, she was a Simpson. All Simpsons had red hair, and she had, up to the day she died, her hair was red as a fire engine. And they had a good married life. They had three girls and one boy. Started out with Uncle Everett, and probably my mother and Aunt Aunt Hilda and Aunt Ruth were the three girls. They lived in Ashland, down the lower end of Ashland. What they had a name for that place, which I don't recall right now. And he, well, like I say, later on in life, they moved in with my mother and father, and they were good. They were not only good company and everything, but Grandma Brown could do anything just as fast as anyone. And I remember one, we always had a after supper, and we washed the dishes. Bill and I, we'd wash the dishes with a little help from Grandma Brown. After all the dishes were washed, we went into the dining room and played Pedro, very popular card game at that time.
Never heard of it.
And Grandpa and I played together. Well, we'd switch around, but generally Grandpa and I played together. Bill and Grandma played together. Well, now Grandma Brown was a Simpson from Kentucky. I don't know exactly where she was, but she may have been born around in Ashland or Russell. Now, Grandpa, his mother's name was Young, and they lived at what we know now as Portland, Kentucky. He had a brother who, boy, I can't think his name. Anyway, he had a brother, and he played the violin, left-handed. He was a left-handed violin player, and good at that time. They had music was everywhere. I mean, in the families and this and that, and when they had any dancing or any occasion that they called for music, they always called for the one that, well, he was the left-handed violin player. I had another brother, and his name was Al, Uncle Al. And they lived pretty close, what they call Frogtown. Frogtown, it's right, and it's west of end of Ashland. Uncle Alf was just Uncle Alf had about 5 or 6 children. I can't name them all. It was Sarah and Jane, Bill, and Toad. Others I don't remember. But Uncle Alf also worked at a around the local brickyards and places like that. I don't think he worked in the iron ore, at the iron ore furnaces. And another brother to Grandpa Brown was what was his name? He died. He stayed at home.
John.
John Brown. Now, Uncle John was a stationary engineer, and he worked around the iron ore furnaces, particularly the olive furnace at Olive here in Lawrence County. And he worked there for, well, until they closed the furnace. Like I said, he was a stationary engineer. He was somewhere along the line, he was educated. And so Grandma and Grandpa Brown, well, they'd live with us for a while, maybe go back to their home over in Frogtown, this and that. And after Eunice and I were married in 35, the 60th anniversary will be
I hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 60 years, same woman. It's kind of a record, I think.
Well, I don't think you've got the Guinness beat, but you don't have a Guinness book beaten yet, but that's a pretty good record. She tolerated you all these years.
Put up with me and I put up with
Well, Grandpa
Yeah.
lived with my mother and father. And my father was something.
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're here to find out. Susie's gonna get Mom some water.
He was quiet and
Could you
had
find
a very
the
likable
kitchen
personality.
I didn't know that. No.
Like a little contrary to my mother, she had a lot of Simpson blood in her. That red hair and everything, which my mother didn't have. She was a beautiful blonde. I remember years later, when I was working on the railroad, this old engineer told me that he was at mother and dad's wedding at the ME church there in Russell, and said your mother was the most beautiful woman that any of us ever saw. And I think she was too.
You have any old pictures of Grandma when she was young? Or Grandpa?
I got one picture here of the family, but it's
No, I mean when they were really young.
no.
No.
Okay, because I've seen the older pictures
Oh.
once you kids were grown and stuff, but I've never seen a very young picture.
I never have either. Oh, yes, we do. We have a picture, well, that wouldn't be young. That'd be,
You know, like when they were dating or when they were first married.
well, they were, Grandpa was wheeling a buggy for our oldest daughter who was just an infant then. Had that picture, but,
Of,
We
of,
don't have,
of Grandpa and Linda then.
Yeah, that was a friend.
I don't remember ever seeing one.
What year was Grandpa born?
I really don't know. I'd have to guess. I think he was, well, there's no problem. You can go to the cemetery and look.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
go and study
Yeah.
in the cemetery.
Maybe I'll do that tomorrow.
I'm, what would it be a fair estimate of it? 1870, 75?
Well, it would be.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a little later. Because Grandpa Seifel was born at 54. Well, Dad was born in 1879, and he was the second oldest. His Grandpa Seifel was born in 54, 56. Well, we'll say 56. That'd be 26 years old. Maybe he was, Grandpa Seifel then was probably born in, what? I think that right after the Civil War.
Where did the family originate from?
Which one?
Well, both sides, really.
You mean
If you-
the
The Seifels and the
Browns?
Browns. Hmm.
Well, the Browns was in Kentucky. Grandpa Brown did live at Hitchens, Kentucky. And they had R&R Furnaces down there, and I think he worked with one of but I'm just thinking that. That's my thinking. I do know they lived at Hitchens. That's down on the road to what's the name of that park over there?
Blue Ridge Parkway?
Armstrong,
Oh, the Greenbow.
Greenville.
On the road to Greenbow, and there was a town there called right there below Sandy River, town there. And the old EK Railroad went through that town. They picked up and they switched up cars out and everything else. And just east of that, northeast of a little bit, there's a tunnel which is still standing. Trains ran through and went over to the iron ore furnace at Hitchin. I said, bring this all in. There, the Hanging Rock iron ore area extended from up in what's the name of that town? Zaleski, in that area, Wellston, Jackson, Ortigalia, well, maybe not, didn't go into Galples. And it crossed the Ohio River here, down close to Hanging Rock, and it went in a east southerly direction, and around Hitchens, maybe four down at Blaine. I can't think of the town I want to. But anyway, it extended into Kentucky. Now, there were some iron ore furnaces in over by close to where Greenbow Lake is now, and it's Princess, Kentucky. That was another place, but that was a large iron ore district. Maybe 200 and some odd miles in length, and width of it within 50 miles. And there was plenty of iron ore. The result was it provided employment for a lot of people just to cut enough wood. That's what they called cordwood then. It took 20 acres, I believe. It took 20 acres of wood to make 1 ton of iron ore. Well, my grandpa's cycle, Dad was born in either McDowell or Doe Hill, Virginia. And that's just across the when they made the state of West Virginia. I'll go back a little further. The state of Virginia, as was known in the earlier times of revolution and everything like that, it extended all the way from the Atlantic coastline inland past the Allegheny Mountains, and then ran into a southerly district down a long ways, maybe to Louisville, Kentucky. Well, that was the state of Virginia. Later, when the Civil War started, the state divided, and that division then caused another state to, like West Virginia, to be born. And there were several counties in the Old Dominion, the old county, Old Virginia, that gave part of their county to make counties in the newly formed West Virginia, like Pendleton, Brooks. Well, Pendleton was one, and Highland County, where my father was born, was one of those counties. They gave part of their county, the same as several others, to create other counties in West Virginia. Now that line runs down around Greenbank, West Virginia, and that's because of the mountain where you drop in what we know as West Virginia now. So that's where he was born. I believe he had a 1,000-acre farm, which wasn't unusual back in those days to have that much acreage. I do know that he had a brother, George, lived over in Pendleton County, West Virginia, and he had 1,000 acres.
What did they raise?
Oh, the farm products.
Tobacco.
Well, they had buckwheat. Apples, a lot of apples. Rye and wheat and everything. And on Grandpa Seipel's farm, he had a grist mill. When I was a young boy, I visited that place. I probably was only around 5 or 6, but we went on the railroad. And we went on. We took the C&O passenger train and went to Stanton, Virginia. Well, Doe Hill was west of Stanton, about 30 miles. But they met us at the station, and we come. Then we come to McDowell and Doe Hill and stayed with the relatives and all this and that. I don't think it was any dad's relation, direct relation, but there was one fellow there. He was he was funny and everything, but back in those days they didn't have much of education or this and that, and he couldn't understand. So, and the trains back in those days were steam engines, and they were called the Iron Horse. And I remember him asking Dad and Uncle Lonnie. Uncle Lonnie was with us and his family. I remember him asking Dad. He said, "Sam, you sure you tied that Iron Horse up real good and he won't get away?" Well, that's right. There But,
Uncle Lonnie never lost it.
Yeah.
oh,
Uncle Lonnie never lost that sense of humor.
oh,
No,
no,
no.
Uncle Lonnie, but getting back to what they raised, they'd always stand in the fall of the year. They sent chestnuts and buckwheat and I'm talking about buckwheat, maybe 25 pound buckwheat and apples. They sent a barrel of apples. And they sent another barrel of apple cider. I'm not quite sure about that, but they put on a train at Stanton, and it come to the station over across the river here, Russell, and then all, of course, Dad and Uncle Lonnie and Uncle Joe and all of them, they knew when to meet that train, of course, and everyone else would meet in Russell knew about it. They'd meet the train too and help unload everything at Grandpa's cycle plant. But then,
Were we slave owners, or were they?
beg pardon?
Were they slave owners, or did they work the farm themselves, or?
Not my grandpa's cycle, but his father. I think they were at one time. Maybe Grandpa Cycle's father or grandfather. Where there were some cycles that did have slaves, and you might find that in what's the name of that organization out there? The Mormons.
Mm-hmm.
They got another church there. What do you call them? Got one in Cincinnati. You can look in the genealogical section of these places. And where I got my information out was at Oakland, where Bill lived. And that was the Mormon church. But they got another name.
Church of the Latter-day Saints.
Latter-day Saints.
Mm-hmm.
And one reference there gave a George Cycle and 2 slaves. I said slaves back in those days. They couldn't do any. They didn't have any rights or recognition or anything. In fact, I don't know where there's any truth to this, but somewhere along the line that they didn't count the slaves in the census, but they would list them not by name, but just like I said, the number.
Well, what was Grandpa's parents' name? Wasn't that Abraham and?
No, he was Abraham. Now, I can't go any further back. I wish I could. That is a dark spot in the family tree, and I don't know. I know that when there was a lot of interest in the family and genealogical this and that, and then the reunion we had down to Ivy's and Bill's there. What were you were all there? The name and like I say, it's just a dead end. But we know it's not a dead end, but finding, it's a dead end for information. I couldn't find any more or anything else.
Well, what did Sam find when he was digging? He made a trip, one trip I know, to Virginia.
We made a trip too.
Well, we've been there several times also.
Well,
We've been to
What
Virginia.
did he find out? Anything any different?
No.
I don't think so.
All
Nothing,
that
nothing new of what I'm trying to remember to tell you. I don't think. But, now you asked what they did. I think they traded a lot. Horse trade, things like that. And I remember one time they told me Dad and Uncle Lonnie and Uncle Boyd. Boyd was the oldest. My father was the second oldest. They all went to Stanton for a big stock sale or trade. Well, a sale, it was a stock day where a lot of trading went on. Well, as the story goes, Uncle Lonnie took an old mule, was about wore out, and didn't know exactly where the mule was. He was a little afraid or a little leery that the mule might die before he got him in Stanton to trade him off. And Dad, I believe, had he had some hounds and sheep, and they started trading. And when it ended up, Uncle Lonnie come back with 2 horses, a crate full of chickens. Dad had he had a lot of poultry too, and a nice riding horse. So apparently they were pretty good traders.
Did pretty well.
Yeah.
Now Charlottesville's not too. My grandfather died in Charlottesville, and it's not too far from Stanton. 40, 45, 50 miles, something like that. Now, we had the last disciple in that family, half brothers and half sisters, was Mary, and she lived in Charlottesville, and where Grandpa's disciple is buried is a little place called Ivy, and it sits about 5, 6 miles outside of Charlottesville, and the graveyard's still there. I believe it's on 64, isn't it? On that Highway 64.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's where Grandpa disciple was married. And married to, she married a Cravens, and they lived in Ivy, and later on moved into Charlottesville.
Mary Cravens was at the family reunion down home.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, she's still alive, right? And living up in Massachusetts?
Well,
She's out west in
she's
a
out
nurse-
west.
She's out
Oh.
west in
Washington.
a nursing home, but we haven't heard for a few months. We don't know.
Oh, I thought she had
We
went
wrote to her.
to be with
We got-
Nancy.
We got a note or a letter about her being a patient in this home in Spokane. What was the name?
Near
Seattle?
Spokane. I thought it was near Spokane. She's with one of the grandchildren, one
Yeah.
of Nancy's. One one of Nancy's children lives there, and that's why she went out there.
It's a good place
Nancy
to
was
be.
the only child she had, but
Yes, they only had Nancy,
Well, now,
but Nancy has grandchildren now, and she went out there. We did hear and we did answer, but we haven't heard.
well, then my grandpa's disciple was married twice. They had, let's see.
Now, we're still speaking of Abraham.
That's right.
Okay.
Grandpa's disciple. He had 7 or 9 children with his first wife, and her name was Rebecca Siren. And that's Joe Siren's daughter. And Joe Siren and the disciples' land adjoined. They both had 1,000 acres apiece. Joe Siren gave 10 acres to the Doe Hill Water Works, and that left him with 990. Grandpa's disciple didn't give anything, or well, maybe no reason for it. I don't. But anyway, he had 1,000 acres. So we'll say there were 7 children by first wife, Rebecca Siren.
Do you know their names?
Hmm?
Do you know who they were? Do you know their names?
Well, that's my father's family. You start with Boyd, you start with Sam, you go to Joe, you go to Lonnie, you go down to Aunt Maud, Aunt Martha, and Aunt Blanche.
It's 7.
Well, that's 7?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then there was 8 left in the other family. There were 17 altogether. So he, with the 2 wives.
What was the second wife's name?
Elston, Mary or Jane or something like that. Elston.
Okay, what were their names?
Oh, don't ask me. I'll name. Well, it was Carrie Lee.
One.
What was the one there that was in the insurance business, lived in Pennsylvania, come to visit us one time?
I can't say the names of the second
Huh?
family. I can't say them. Oh. Aunt Martha was the first family, though, wasn't she?
she was the baby, wasn't she?
She was the baby of the first family. All right, now we're trying
Well,
the second family.
there was Mary.
Now there was Mary.
Mary Craven is 1 year older than I am. But yet, she's the last of the disciple family.
Second family, she was. We don't know the name.
So she's your aunt,
Uh-huh.
and she's 1 year older than you.
Yes.
Right.
In the second family.
Second family. Oh, what was the fella? He was in the insurance business.
I know.
And he had, well, I can't remember it all myself.
So, what was it like growing up here in Ironton? What did you do?
Well, I had a good time. But not like to. Not anything like it is today. We created our own playthings and games and things like that. Like Go Sheepy Go and have a fox chase, and we'd have shinny, and that was a form of hockey. You take an old oatmeal 12-ounce can, and then you'd have you a hockey stick, which you make, cut it out of a piece of hickory and bake it in the oven, and then we didn't have any fancy. We didn't have anything fancy. It was just. Good old-fashioned things that we did. We enjoyed it. It was a good environment. The neighborhood was a very good environment.
It was called Irish Town?
No, we lived on the edge of Ironton.
Okay. I remember them talking about Irish Town.
And
What was the population of Ironton back then? You know?
Pretty close. It was running better than 25, maybe 29,000. I think that's the highest it ever got prior to the Depression in 30. Everyone was working. I remember when they paved 6th Street. For a long time, that street wasn't, and Railroad Street wasn't paved. It just gravel. And they had apple shows back in, 16, 17, or 18. I was born in Ashton in 1911. And then we moved to Russell. I had a terrible sick spell when I was 4 years old, boy, and not even expected to live, but I did. You could see. But
We're glad you did.
they had, that was when I was 4, and I think we moved to Russell, which is down the river from Ashland, about 4 or 5 miles.
This picture, not to change the subject, but this picture up on the wall, how old are you there?
What?
Your baby picture. Is that?
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah.
How old are you there?
4.
4.
Yeah. Well, I'm about talked out.
Oh,
I
no.
could go a little bit more, but call of nature is going to have a break or a recess. I don't know.
We're going to have a recess?
He started Friday. He goes again in the morning. He's having all these tests run. And he's been taking medicine, and tomorrow's the last of it. Because he has lost all this weight. Dr. Wheeler doesn't know why. So tomorrow is the last of it. He started Friday morning over at Kingsdale. And he's taking medicine. Goes to the bathroom frequently from all the things that he's...
That's probably from the medicine.
It's from the medicine, I think it is.
Well, while he's gone, would you like to talk a little bit about your mother and dad and your family?
Now, my background is entirely different because I come from the Midwest. And my father and mother were both born in Minnesota, near the little town of Geneva. My grandparents were living there then, and later on they all moved to Ellendale, Minnesota. And when Ellendale was a brand new town, and the railroad came in, and my grandmother cooked in a tent for the railroad workers. They were all really in back of our house. They bought property in Ellendale. So I was born in Ellendale. But
What's your birth date?
My birthday is May 28, 1906. I am older than Paul. And I went to school in Ellendale until we moved to Fairmont, Minnesota. And mother's sister lived in Fairmont, and the two families lived very close to each other on the same street. That would be Averill's parents. So I graduated from the Catholic high school in Fairmont, Minnesota, St. Augustine. Then I went to college in Winona, Minnesota, and graduated from there. My cousins all went to Mankato State University, and I had a daughter and son-in-law graduate, and I did great deal of summer school work at Mankato State. And our cousins were professors there, so we're all connected with Mankato State as far as going on to school.
You wanna go sit down?
Mm.
We'll let you go through.
Go ahead.
Talk a little bit about me.
Well, we wanna talk some more.
I can talk some more. My grandfather, Kelly, came from Ireland at the time when all the Irish were coming over to this country because of the potato famine. And he came on a ship into Paterson, New Jersey. In some way or other, the Irish just worked themselves west because they heard of the free land and the good farming. Farming was all they knew, really. And they came through Wisconsin. They stayed in Wisconsin for a while, then came over to Minnesota. So my grandfather then was born in Minnesota, but my great-grandfather was from Ireland, and he had 2 wives. And when the Irish came, they all settled in a little town called Newry, and that Catholic church has documents of all the Irish. I went and got some documents from the priest there because he has so many, and they built the church, and it was called Newry, from Newry in Ireland. If you read about the trouble there, you'll find about the town of Newry. It's close to Belfast. But they came from Newry, and when they built the town and built the church, they called it Newry. And they built a big cemetery. But the town never really flourished. But the church is still there. It's a large church, and it's a large cemetery. I have been there. And my grandfather was married twice, so his first wife was a Quinn. Now, Quinn is a very common Irish name, and there are loads of cousins back there around in that area of a Quinn. And she died when she was 36, and I went to the cemetery. She has a large monument. She was 36 years old, and she'd had 8 children then, and my father was the oldest of the 8. So he helped raise the other 7 children. And when they were, like in their teens or a little bit older, my grandfather married a girl from Ireland who couldn't speak English. She spoke Gaelic. And that's what she spoke till the day she died. She didn't want to learn English. So he was about the only person. There were a few people there that could talk to her. Not many. And she and the children never got along. I don't know what that trouble was about. So when they got a little bit older, they all went to Minneapolis. And they all worked up there. And my father went. He was the oldest. And the oldest girl was Mame, and she decided to become a nun. And she joined the St. Joseph Order. She'd already become a nurse. She'd taken her nurse's training, then she decided to be a nun. And it so happened that she really did, I guess you'd call it, rise in the order, and she was the superintendent of the home that took care of these girls from South Dakota, North Dakota, and Montana, Minnesota, who were going to have babies, and at that time it was a terrible disgrace. And the parents paid a great deal of money for this. My aunt was running it, and they paid the nuns a big sum of money to take the girls in, to get them away where people would know it or find out about it. And they had a lot of girls. I used to visit there, and I was named for my Aunt Mame. Her name was Sister Eunice. I was named for her, and I'd go and visit her, and she took a great deal of pride in fixing up the rooms for the girls. She made curtains for them and couch covers, and she took good care of them. But she always said the saddest part in her life was going down to court when they were trying to bring the young men in to pay a little bit of the bills. And every time she went down there and she testified about the girl and the baby, whether it had been born or not, these young men brought their friends in, and there'd be 5 or 6 young men get up and swear before the judge that they had been out with the girl. It would be hard to tell who would be the father, and the judge would just pound and say, case dismissed. So they never got
What
a
year
young
would this
man
have
to
been?
pay the bills.
What year would this have been about?
Well, I got out of college in 27, and I used to visit in the 20s, early 20s. I had another aunt there, and I used to go up and visit her, Aunt Josephine. And Aunt Josephine took me on a streetcar, I remember, when I was 14, and I saw the first black person I'd ever seen. I'd read about them in books, but I had no idea what a black person looked like. That's the first one I saw was on a streetcar. A black woman sat across from me. So it had to be up around in the 20s. And I'd go to Minneapolis to visit them. And I came to Ironton to teach. Met Paul. We were married in 35.
And that's how did you actually really pick Ironton out, or
They sent me, the nuns sent me. I taught at St. Joseph, and they sent me to teach over here at St. Joseph. Now that's the Irish side of the family, but my mother's side of the family, my mother was a Davis, and my grandmother was a Kinnear, and her father was James Kinnear, and there was a famous Indian uprising in the western part of Minnesota, and he fought in that. Now that one's in the history books. He also went to the Civil War, and I think it was the 101st Regiment from Minnesota. They were always remembered because they fought in the Battle of Gettysburg, and when they were in battle and they were approaching with a line, they always carried one white bird up on their shoulder. They could always tell the Minnesota Regiment because they went into battle with a bird. And it was, the family always kept talking about it. When he was mustered out, they gave him a choice. He could have a piece of land in Minnesota, or he could have 2 mules. And he said his wife, my grandmother, had kept the farm going all this time by herself, and they needed 2 mules. So he took the 2 mules. The piece of land that he refused is where Fort Snelling, Minnesota is today, very valuable, and he gave it up for 2 mules because he said he didn't want any more land. He had a great deal of land, and he thought 2 mules would help. And she kept the farm going with my grandfather and his brother. There were only 2 boys in the family, and she always told about the time that the boys ran to the house and said there was a man in the barn. So she grabbed her gun. She kept house with a gun. And she went down to the barn and looked in, and there was a young man standing in the corner of the barn. And she raised the gun and said she'd shoot. And he said, "Don't shoot me, I'll tell you who I am." So he came out. He had escaped from a prison way down south. I think maybe it was Andersonville. And he was trying to get home, and he was in rags, and he hadn't had anything to eat for days. So she brought him in the house and gave him clothes, my great-grandfather's clothes, and cooked a good meal for him and started him on his way. And she always wondered if he got home, but she never did hear any more about him. And then my great-grandfather came home, and they had this farm in southern Minnesota.
And what did you tell me the name of the?
Yes, my grandfather was a Davis, a Delmer Davis. He had a brother, L. There were only 2 in that family. And my great-grandfather was a Kinnear, a Linda's girl, Susan, is Susan Kinnear. That's for my great-grandfather. He's the one that fought. I think it was the 101st, but I'm not too sure about that. And they all moved to Ellendale. That was where I was born. And I've been back there within recent years. My grandparents bought one house, and then they bought the house on the corner. And the house on the corner, they turned into the parsonage for the church. My grandmother was a very strong Methodist, and so I think she gave that, and that's the parsonage for the Methodist church. She did a great deal of church work, and whenever the bishop or the circuit riders came around, they always stayed at our house, all of them. On the other hand, when Dad's Sister Eunice had 2 weeks in the summer, she couldn't travel without another nun. That was a rule. They couldn't even go downtown or do anything unless they went in pairs. She'd bring another nun with her, so we always had 2 nuns in the summertime, and we had the bishop and other ministers stayed at our house.
What a combination.
Wasn't it? Well,
So you got educated in both.
yes, I did. And one thing that I wanted the grandchildren, whoever listened to the tape, to remember about my grandmother Davis, my grandfather Davis. At some time, let's see, my mother was born in 1884, so it has to be right before 1884. They went out to the Dakotas, and my grandfather was in charge of the Indian reservation, and he also carried mail up and down the river. And they got to know the Indians, and my grandmother would bank the stove in the kitchen at night, and when she'd get up in the morning, there'd be 5 or 6 Indians wrapped in blankets sleeping on the floor so they'd get some warmth. And so, because she did that, they never had any trouble with the Indians like other people did. There was a lot of trouble with Indians. There were a lot of scalpings. There were a lot of things that happened, but not my grandmother or grandfather, because she let them sleep on the kitchen floor, so they never bothered her. And then they came back home. It took a long time to get back to Minnesota because the dust storms were so bad. Dust storms then were terrible. You could hardly sometimes get outside to breathe, and they'd go into caves. And grandmother said one day they were in this cave and it was blowing outside, and there was a woman there with a baby that was sick, and the baby died. And grandmother never forgot it. The woman sat in the corner of that cave with the baby wrapped up with a blanket, crying. And the wind was blowing so outside, and my grandmother always said that was one of the terrible things that happened to her, to sit in a cave with that baby. They couldn't even bury it because the sand was so bad outside the cave. So they came back to Minnesota then, and my mother then was born in Nebraska. This was because they'd gone out west, so she wasn't born in Minnesota. And they only had one more. That was my Uncle Harry. And Uncle Harry was a forester out in Montana after he was a young man. And I was there before he was married. The first time he came home, my grandmother said, "You go out to the woodshed and take those clothes off." And she grabbed his clothes, and she took out a kettle of hot water, and she said, "You can't sleep in my beds till you get a bath and clean clothes." She said, "I'm afraid you have." Well, she was sure that he had bugs because of the life he'd been leading. So he threw his clothes out the door, and she burned them in a bonfire. And then she took out clean clothes for him. But he liked it out in Montana, and he went back. And he married Rose, my Aunt Rose, and she was beautiful. And I can't remember for sure, I think, whether she was half Indian or fourth Indian. But she was a beautiful woman, and the children all showed the Indian blood. And they were living where that terrible flood was in Montana. I called the Red Cross here in Ironton and said I had a relative out there. Did they get any messages, you know? And in about 3 or 4 days, one of my cousins of that family called me up. They were all safe. They were close to where it had been, and so many of their neighbors had been killed, but they hadn't. But in later years, we haven't heard from them, and their name is Davis, and they're in Montana. I really don't know too much about them now. And one other thing I would like to say, so that somebody, after I'm gone, will remember this. My grandmother was like a weather bureau, and she was like a weather bureau because the Indians taught her. They were very good to her because she was good to them. And they taught her all the signs of weather, and they knew them, of course. The Indians know weather. They always knew it. And they taught her, and when she came back home, I can remember the spring of every year, all the farmers around wouldn't plant a thing until they came into Ellendale and asked Susie Davis when to plant. And she'd tell them what the weather was. And the buggies were all hitched up in front of our house. There'd be a line of buggies and just be farmers asking Susie Davis when should they plant. And she'd tell them when to plant. Because weather on the prairie makes a great deal of difference. You can lose everything you have over that weather. And she was very good about it. Now the church, the Methodist church, never had their picnic until they came and asked Susie Davis what day should be the church picnic out at the lake. We lived surrounded by the area where I was. There were so many lakes. My whole early life was tied up with water. I was swimming and diving when I was in the first grade, 6 years old, and I was swimming. I wasn't the only one. All of us, everybody could. And in the wintertime, we skied and we ice skated and we played hockey. Now, those were all our sports because we were by so many lakes. So my life was very different from people here in Ironton or in Ohio.
What Indian tribes were up there? Do you know? What do you know? What Indian tribes were?
Oh, the Sioux.
The Sioux.
It was the Sioux Indians. Up where we go in the summer, that's the Chippewa Indians. What was that other name? The Sioux and the...
Well, they had the Fox in there too.
Yeah, the Fox were in the Montana and the Dakota.
I never heard of them.
But the Sioux Indians were Minnesota and Wisconsin.
I'm over Ojibwe or not. They're more northern.
And no, Ojibways are farther north. Ojibways are very close to the Chippewa. It's just saying in another way. That's farther north of the Indians. We had a lot of gypsies went through Minnesota. And when the gypsies came, every child ran home because they stole children, but they wanted to steal blondes. And I was a brunette. I never worried too much. But they'd go through your garden and just strip it flat. You wouldn't have a tomato. You wouldn't have a potato left when the gypsies went through. And they went through our town regularly, and all the children went in the house, and women were scared to death of them. We had a lot of gypsies when I was growing up. They were on their way south, I think.
Why did they kidnap children?
For their own. And they didn't have any blondes. They're all dark. All gypsies are dark. They didn't have a blonde. A blonde to them was something very special. So they kidnap blondes, and all parents were watching them very carefully, and the rest of us that was a rule. That was just a rule for all of us. If the gypsies came in town, you went home. It didn't make any difference where you were or what you were doing. If you were in school, the teachers took care of you. But the gypsies were dangerous. They were
Are there
very
still a lot of
dangerous.
them up
They
there?
go to the store and just steal, and they didn't know how to stop them. They go into the grocery store and take everything they want and walk out. People were afraid of gypsies when I was growing up.
Couldn't say anything to them.
No, afraid of them. Afraid of gypsies. They had knives. They carried knives more than guns. They were dangerous. There were lots of gypsies. I don't think there are anymore. The last gypsies I saw were about 30 years ago. So down in Kentucky, and they were in Cadillacs.
Did they steal
We stopped
those?
for gas. Sometimes they changed.
Well, maybe they stole the Cadillac.
Maybe they did. Maybe they did steal everything.
So how did you and Uncle Paul meet?
Because I came down to Ironton to teach, but I don't exactly remember how we met, Paul. I think at a dance. Did we? I don't know. I really can't remember.
No, I tell you. No, I won't. I'll never tell.
That's not fair.
It's just, well, I'll say this. I saw you one time downtown, and I asked someone, I forget who I was with. I knew, who's that girl there? And they said, oh, Taffy Glenn. Said, well, that's a school teacher at St. Joe. And I just investigated a little bit further and got in contact with her and over the telephone.
You mean they had telephones back then?
Well, they had operators that would take your call and everything.
Well, I can even remember that.
Operators,
Mhm.
before we got the dial.
Oh, I can remember.
I was in high school before we got the dial.
I
Phones
thought we
here.
got it in '59.
Yeah, I was in
Sound
high
right.
school. I graduated in
I
'61,
think I
so
got that dial out there in '59. And one time it rang and I went out and it was Grandpa Seipel. And he said, Eunice, and I said yes, and Paul was working. He said, I did it. I said, what'd you do, Grandpa? He said, I did it all by myself. I said, what did you do? It didn't make any sense to me. He said, I rang your telephone number, and he said, you answered.
Oh.
And he was so proud of himself.
That was a miracle.
That was a miracle. He rang, he did it right, and he got me. And he kept saying, I did it all by myself, he said.
You remember
was
what
good.
your phone number was back then?
402 or 403. 403. What was yours, Ida?
Can't remember. It was a 3-digit.
It had an 8. Yours had an 8 in it, I think.
But I can't remember.
I can't either. It had an 8, I think.
They come to your house. Telephone solicitor. And talk to you and try to get a phone for them. Imagine that.
So where did you go for dates and everything growing up? What was there to do here in Ironton or in the area?
Lots of dances, weren't there? Lots of dances in Ireland.
Yeah, we like to dance. Yeah.
Movies. You know, that movie down on First Street, what was the name?
East End.
Well, there's-
East End was up and the Marlowe was downtown.
Yeah.
And there was the Ronay.
Grand
And
was
there
on
Ronay.
Street.
There was the old lyric. I don't know where that was.
That was up on Kemp, the Larry.
No, that's the eastern. Lyric was down on Lawrence.
North 2nd Street. wasn't it?
Yeah.
No.
Second and Lawrence.
Uh-huh.
Well, I tell you who Stern was the owner of it.
Mhm.
Yeah. We used to go down there, a bunch of us boys, we got, everyone chewed tobacco about in those days, mail pouch, you know. And one night they said, well, only cost a dime to get in. And 4 or 5 of us said, well, I'll take a chew of tobacco. And the first one spits has to pay for the other one's submission.
No.
Well, I didn't pay, but I sure had a sick stomach.
How old were you then?
Huh?
How old were you?
Oh, I don't know. I was about a sophomore in high school.
You graduated from Ironton High.
Yeah.
Did you go to any college?
Yeah, I went to a little college down in Georgia, Madison A&M. Then when I worked, I had a job, got on the railroad as a fireman, and they have what they call hostlers. It takes the engines around, puts them on the train and everything like that. At Union Station in Cincinnati. So, I got drafted on one of those jobs there. Oh, I was down there, tell you what, about 2 years, wasn't it? A year and a half. Well, anytime, anyway, I went to USC for 2 semesters, but I think something like that. I was back in the 40s.
So?
So you have enough?
Oh, no.
You don't?
There's so much more. Yeah, okay. So you, when did you always work? When after you started having your family?
Yes. In the years that I was going to college at home, I worked at the telephone office, and they paid me 25 cents an hour, and I thought that was wonderful. I worked at the telephone office right up till almost Labor Day. I saved every penny that I made and bought my clothes to go back to college. And then I was very fortunate. I had a cousin in college at Carlton in Northfield, and she had beautiful clothes, much more expensive than we could afford in our family, but that family could. And she'd get tired of her clothes, and she mailed all her clothes to me while I was in college. So I always had nice clothes because Lottie didn't want to keep her clothes very long, and they just kept buying her clothes, and she'd mail them to me. And sometimes my mother would finish them out because she and I were exactly the same size while I was in college. I was thin all those years. And Mother sometimes would take the clothes from college and she'd finish them out. But my cousins sent me beautiful clothes. I was lucky. I worked all summer. I worked in the telephone office the whole 4 years I was going to college.
And you didn't
That
have.
was when people, you called the operator.
Yeah.
I was an operator. Yeah.
I
I
remember
was an
those.
operator. 25 cents an hour, and I thought that was good.
Well, 25 cents an hour was. I worked at Grassley's for 10 cents an hour.
Did you?
I sure did.
10 cents.
10 cents an hour.
I did better than you did. I got a quarter.
You were wealthy, weren't you?
Yes, I was wealthy, and I saved.
37 when the water went down. I went down there and helped clean up.
Did you?
The water was in those dime stores down there. And then they hired me at 10 cents an hour.
10 cents an hour.
Well, we panned the old Continental stove. Remember them over there, Continental stove?
My dad worked there for 10 cents an hour.
We worked on that. We panned us boys Pat Arlen was the manager. I think it was 7 I was starting out on that roof. What back in those days, a tire come in maybe 50 or 100-pound rolls, and then it being cold, you'd put it in a barrel, and there was fire underneath the barrel, wouldn't fire, and it'd melt the tire. Then you would pour it out of the barrel into a 5-gallon bucket, and then someone on the roof would drop a bucket down, and you fill it up, and they'd pull that tire up on the roof, and you'd spread it. 10 cents an hour. It was hot. Well, like I say, there were 7 of us started, and only 3 of us that was there the last day. It took us 2.5 days to tar that roof.
Dad worked there for 10 cents an hour.
Yeah.
And usually worked 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's what they paid.
That's what they paid.
Well, my first job was with down at Ace Harmon's shoe shop. Well, $18 a week. That was pretty good money.
I was going to say you were rich.
Yeah, that was pretty good money. $18. Of course, back in those days, there were a lot of shoes shops and everything. Because people, well, their shoes were leather or rubber. We had what they call a panko sole. That was kind of rubberized. But leather was generally it. But then to introduce these Reeboks and all those shoes, probably got one on yourself.
Yeah, they're comfortable.
That took off. Well, there wasn't any business for shoe shops after that. Yes, they had, I believe they had 4 or 5 shoe shops in this town. They had one right over here, Palmer's. They had one down, Doc Payne had one.
There was one down Center Street.
Yeah, and Ace Harmon had one. And I kind of think in the upper end of town there was one there. Maybe not. Maybe it was only 4.
Well, how was it like when you got married during the Depression then?
Well, we talk about the groceries. Paul was working at Armco, and Boyer's Grocery was on Heffler Street, and I had $5 a week for my grocery money, and I took the little red wagon that the children had, and I'd pull it down to Boyer's, and I could get that all loaded up, and I'd still have some money left, and I was buying cans of milk for the babies, and that was 10 cents. And a pound of hamburger was 10 cents, I think. The prices were low then, but the wages were low. It's the same difference.
Yeah, it evens out.
When you talk about it. But with that $5, it kept me a whole week. We had 3 babies, and I could buy soap for the washing machine. But I said I knew more hamburger recipes than anybody in town.
I think everybody did.
I think everybody knew. Now steak would be like for Christmas or something. You know, it was before hamburger went up in price. We didn't have steak very often. We had chicken.
Had chicken every Sunday.
Chicken every Sunday. Mm-hmm. Yeah, chicken every Sunday. That's right.
Mother baked pies on Saturday.
Mm.
She always made 4 pies. And then she got the chicken. And we knew what we were going to have Sunday to eat.
Yeah.
We had the chicken and potatoes. And we had pie for dessert.
That's right.
If Dad stayed out of it, Dad could sit down and eat a whole pie anytime.
He could.
Uh-huh.
Oh, if it's good, I could too.
Well, Dad had 17 or 19 people in our house there on 207 North 6th Street.
During the
During
Depression.
that depression. I had 2 cousins that were born there.
Who all lived there?
Well, it was generally,
Aunt Ruth and Uncle.
well, it was Mother's sister, Aunt Ruth, Uncle Lee, and Aunt Lo. Let's see now. Well, and they had children, see. I think Uncle Lee had 2 children. Aunt Ruth probably had about 4 or 5.
5.
And who was the other 2 that stayed there? Well, you wouldn't think that you'd forget them, would they? And Uncle Lee, Dad gave him $50, and they had won a poker game, and Aunt Lo and Uncle Lee wanted to go to Chicago. So Dad gave them $50, and they had an old rattle trap of a car, and they took off for Chicago. Well, he was a hustler. He was a good pool player, and he was a good bowler. And that's the way he made his living after he got in Chicago. He'd make it by being a pool shark or by bowling or things of that line. So they had a fire over there. That's where one of the cousins died in that Chicago fire.
Was that the Chicago fire?
No,
I
much
mean,
later than
when
that.
they were
Oh,
in
okay.
Chicago.
I didn't know how far back we was going here.
Oh,
No, it was much later than
Okay.
that.
This is in this century.
Cow.
20s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That
Well,
was in,
Well, that, it just kept going, and, well, I didn't pay much attention to it and everything. I trying to make a few pennies myself. But next thing we knew, why, Aunt Lo and them began to move up in the world. It just happened that Uncle Lee was shooting pool with this fellow, and he was beating him quite regularly. And maybe the last game they played or something, Phil said, well, I don't have a, whatever they're playing for, we'll say $1. He said, I don't have $1. He said, take these old stocks, and they're just no good, but someday they may be good, but he said, you just take them. Well, lo and behold, it was stocks on land in Pennsylvania, and it began drilling there, and they hit gas, they hit oil, and everything else. It wasn't long till Aunt Lo and was in millionaire class.
Oh.
I remember when in 1954 won the pennant. Dad and mother went up there, and boy, they were treated like royalty.
Well, I sure hope they win this year.
Well, do you want to bet? They're not going to.
Oh, no, don't say that.
No.
Well, they might, but I doubt it.
I'll be
They
Atlanta.
deserve to. They
I'll be
played
Atlanta,
well.
Maybe right 4th Street.
Well, they owned a lot of property right there, right around where Western Reserve College.
Oh, okay, in
Yeah,
Hudson.
now, that's back in the 30s, see. And they had a big mansion, I reckon.
Oh, there's
I
some
don't know
beautiful
what.
places there in
Mhm.
Hudson. Beautiful homes up in Hudson. That's a pretty area.
Mm. Well, they were in that. I understand now that Western Reserve, where the property they own, Western Reserve owns it now. That's the way it goes. Poor Uncle George and Aunt Ruth, well, they tried their best. They worked for the YMCA in Logan, and what's the name of that other place down there? Cane Fork or something like that, where the coal fields are, had the YMCA. And it got so bad, they got laid off. Next thing you know, they showed up there at Dad's place, and one time, he was the only one in the bunch that was working. And he was the youngest man on the job on the C&O, or on this division there. But, no, we got along all right.
How long was it before you moved into this house? How long were you married?
Uh-huh.
Oh, we lived in this house here
You've lived 50 years.
51 years now.
And Becky went to 1st grade from here. Bill and Linda were already in school, and Becky went to 1st grade. She graduated in 57 from high school. Let's see, 12 from 57 to 45. 50
Okay,
years.
so you were actually lived
Oh,
somewhere
we
else
were-
for about 9 years
Uh-huh.
then.
We lived up on 6th Street, or we lived on 7th Street when we bought and moved down here. But we lived a while up on 6th Street in Phil Ehrlich's house. We had the upstairs of it. And we lived up on 7th Street.
We lived on 8th Street, we lived on 5th Street.
We lived on
I
8th
lived on
Street and
7th
5th
Street.
Street and 6th Street before we bought a house. Could buy a house.
Well, during the
We
flood.
rented.
Can I, for family's sake, can I ask how much you paid for this house?
Oh, I don't know.
Do you remember?
About 3,500.
Around 4,000.
Mm.
That was a lot.
That was a lot. Yeah, that was
Oh,
a
it
lot
was
for
a
us
lot.
to handle.
When we were renting, we were
Grandma and Papa
paying
wanted to buy a
12,
house for $5,000.
We were paying
You
$12
couldn't
and
do it.
$15 a month
$15,
rent.
$16.
Okay, how much?
And now, down in Lexington, you know, this one friend of Becky's laid off from, Ashland Oil cut off so many now. Did you know that? Well, she's cut off, but she could go to Lexington, and she went down. The best rent that the ones who are going down are looking for is $900 a month, Lexington. That's why she isn't going. But rent is high all around here. It's $300 a month.
Well,
like
that little place Mother rented was $300. Up there on 9.
They're all
I
around
paid $300 a month for that little 4-room.
house. She didn't
shack
have a
I
big
had
house.
there.
Well, it's a little bit
No,
more
300
better
is
than a
kind of the
shack.
average right now. But cities, it's around 900. And And I think beautiful houses here now are all 700, 600 and 700, big houses. So we paid 12 and 15, or 15 when we were married. That's what we paid for rent.
We lived up on 7th Street, and Mr. Hacker down there at the Iron City Hardware, he owned it. And I'd wear an arm coat, 40 cents an hour. And you may only work about 6 or 8 weeks, and you'd be off for 2 or 3 months. It wasn't every year-round thing. So it got a rumor come around that we were going to get a nickel an hour increase. So I went down there to pay the rent, and he said, I'll have to raise your rent. So I kind of protested a little bit, and he said, well, I'm going to wallpaper. He said, you're going to get a nickel an hour raise. I said, Mr. Hager, we're not getting a raise. Well, he says in the paper that's what. He used that and he raised the rent.
Whether you got the raise or not.
Went to 15.
He raised the rent $2 a month.
Or the nickel an hour raise.
He's gonna get his share of it, huh? Okay, well,
The Hackers have got a pot full of money.
Yes, they have.
okay, we'll do a rundown then. Then there was my grandpa Seipel, your father's parents, was Abraham and Rebecca Siren Seipel. And they had 7 children.
I think it's 7.
You can count it.
Okay.
Well, you want to count them? There's Boyd, he was the oldest. And Dad,
Sad.
and Uncle Joe,
Joe,
and Uncle Lonnie.
Lonnie, that's 4.
And Aunt Martha,
5,
and Blanche,
6,
and Aunt Maud.
7.
Was there one more?
I don't know.
Or did you
Wait-
name
Wait a
George?
minute, I didn't count Uncle George in there.
No,
George.
you didn't. Then make it 8.
The only reason I know Uncle George is because he married Grandma's sister, right? How do you know how Grandma and Grandpa met?
Well,
Your
Dad
parents.
was
Your
working
parents.
Dad was working on the railroad. I think at that time he was an engineer. He wasn't a fireman. He hired in 1901 or 1902, but he didn't work but only a short period of time until they promoted him to an engineer. What I say, I think they were married around in 1909 or could have been 1910 too. Now you want to know what?
How they met? Where they
I wouldn't
met?
have any idea. I wouldn't have any idea.
Okay. All right. We'll summarize your family then. And so, Linda Sue is the eldest, and her birth date.
July 17th,
July the 17th,
36.
36.
36. Okay, and she married.
George Coward in 61. It was November, but I don't know the day. But it was 61, I think.
Okay, and then their children.
Their children are, the oldest is Paul, George, then David, then Will, and Susan.
Okay, and
They
then,
had one that died in birth.
There was one died, Tommy died before Will was born, or before Susan was born. He died, he was born with a defective heart. He
I didn't
he
even know
lived,
that.
a week or maybe 2 weeks in the
I did
hospital.
not know that.
He did. He's buried in Baltimore, and they named him Thomas. And she calls him Tommy, but he's buried over in Baltimore, not Cincinnati. So she really has had 5 boys. Has 4 living.
I just thought she'd had a miscarriage.
No, that baby lived a while, and George's friends all rallied because they were all heart men, just like he was.
Mm-hmm.
And he called in the good heart men came in, but it was such a bad defect they just couldn't save that baby. It had the best of care you could ever have.
Well, the auricle and the ventral veins that come out of your heart was all twisted around like you take a piece of twine and twist it up and roll it over and everything.
Linda fell downstairs when she was pregnant, and they think the way she landed that it affected the baby. She was pregnant when she fell that time.
Could very well.
Could very well. I mean, they don't know, but they think that's what happened.
Okay, now, Paul is your second. Now, I'd like to know, how did he get the name of Bill Bill?
Well, that was a joke when we had the baby at the house and we were getting ready. He hadn't been baptized yet. We hadn't taken him over to St. Lawrence's where he was baptized. And it was a joke. Somebody started calling him Bill. And then somebody said, oh, another Bill that they liked. And they started saying Bill as a joke. It was just a joke around the house. Didn't mean a thing. Because they knew 2 Bills. My father was Bill. And they knew another
My
Bill.
grandfather was Bill. That's where. That
Grandfather was Bill. He was Bill Brown, and my father was Bill Kelly. And they were talking about the 2 Bills. That's the way it was. I knew they were talking about somebody. And they started just saying Bill, and I hadn't gone to the church yet with him to have him baptized. And it was nothing but a joke.
Because his name has
But they
nothing to
did
do with
know
Bill.
somebody over in Ashland who had the name Bill.
Oh.
They knew a young man over there that had it. So we had grandparents there we were talking about that were Bills. I guess that was it.
He's always been Bill.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and Bill.
His regular name is Paul Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is Paul Brown. Well, they just took the maiden names, like Kelly, or Bill, I call him. And,
I still call him Bill.
Well, everybody in the family does, but not
Well, except
people that know
Linda.
him.
Linda calls him Paul.
I
And
know
she
she
talked
does.
about Paul, and I'm thinking of you.
Uh-huh.
No,
She
you can't
does.
place Bill as Paul.
Mhm. Yes, I think she does call him Paul. But when we were out there and I'd call him Bill, his girls would just go into fits of giggling. They thought that was the funniest thing that their father was called Bill. And they'd giggle and giggle, and I'd forget and call him Bill again. We always have.
How are the girls?
Well, the youngest one has a very good job. She is with AAA out there. They sent her to Detroit just a while ago. They send her to different conventions. She has an excellent job. And the oldest girl is married and has 3 little boys, and she runs a daycare nursery herself at her house. And she has 3 little boys, and they're all in school now.
But she had, I think, one, and it was an infant. Was the last that I knew.
Oh, she has 3 little boys. They're all in school now. Nice-looking little boys when we get the pictures. Paul has seen them, but I haven't. He went out that time to California, and I didn't go. I guess I was working maybe or something.
Okay, but Bill married
Gerda
Gerda, what was her last name?
Breitkopf, German.
Breitkopf.
Her parents came from Germany. She and her brother were born there in California, but the parents came from Germany. And Gerda has been very close to the German family. She's been back to Germany a number of times. And she taught her girls how to speak German, and they can speak German as well as English.
That's Sabina, Bill's.
That's Bill's youngest,
Yeah.
Sabina.
Yeah, I've met Sabina.
They got a talking car equipment thing there. And someone's told, I don't know, it's an article on it. Yeah.
And Becky's two girls both have good jobs.
Oh, we haven't got, wait, we'll show them Bill
We're
minute.
still on Bill.
Yes.
He
All
has
right.
a few years
His
before
children.
retirement, and she is a school teacher, and she might retire this year or next year.
Okay, they live,
Oakland, California.
okay, and their children are.
Their children, two girls, Sabina and Heidi.
And then, are they married?
Heidi is married, has 3 boys.
Do you know their names?
Sabina, and the boys' names? I'd have a bad time with that. Do you remember the boys' name? I've never seen.
Oh, Jason, Matthew,
I don't think he knows either.
let's see.
We haven't seen them that much. We live too far.
Mm-hmm.
We see pictures. They send pictures. I can't think of a name.
They're all biblical names.
I can't remember.
Okay, and then Rebecca was your third.
Rebecca was our third. Her husband died 2 years ago. She has 2 girls.
What was his name?
Shannon.
No, her husband.
Her husband's name was Richard Moffat. He died, it was 2 years this July. He had a bad accident in a private
I
club.
can turn that light on over there on the wall.
Oh, I'm fine. I can see.
And
His was an accidental death.
accidental death. And the oldest girl, Monica, teaches bilingual because she speaks Spanish fluently. She went to school in South America. And she teaches a bilingual class in, what's the name of that town? Framingham? Framingham, Massachusetts. And Shannon is with a big investment company. I can't say the name of it, one of the biggest. She works in Boston. And she lives in Boston. And Monica lives in Framingham, I think. I think that's where her
Oh, Shannon graduated from George.
She graduated from
Nice.
George Washington.
Huh?
No, she graduated from George Mason. Monica graduated from George Washington in Washington, D.C. They've both been out
I
of
thought
college
you
a few
graduated
years.
from American University. Monica.
Yes, she did. I made a mistake there. She graduated from American University. And Shannon graduated from George Mason. I got that mixed up. But they're both working.
Okay, and Gretchen? Mary Gretchen. Or,
I don't know how to handle it. Gretchen
Well,
is
just-
divorced.
okay.
She had 2 boys. Can't say his name. The boy's name,
Oh, Michael and J.D. Jeffrey.
Michael is out of college now. He went to college at Northern Michigan. He's graduated. J.D.'s in high school.
Okay. That pretty much takes it, except I want to hear about you and being in the legislative. Your term for the government. How did you get involved in politics?
We like politics.
That's not a big
Well-
hard to do in Orange County.
No, we like politics.
When I was a central committeeman for years and years.
So it was
Democratic Central Precinct Committeeman. And, well, just fooled around in politics. But this is a little peculiar. 1948, Red Allen was the chairman of the Democratic Party here. Red and I were pretty friendly, and so we were talking there one day, and I said something about, I'd like, maybe can't find anyone to run, I'd run for sheriff. Well, he said, let me think about that, and he said, I'll let you know in about 2 or 3 days. Well, we did. Went to lunch, and he said, well, Pete Burke wanted to run for sheriff. I said, well, that's all right. Well, but he said that there's no one that's running for state representative. I said, well, I'll run then. Well, and I did. Oh, I know one wanted to run. Your opponent was Oakley Collins. I'd give him about, I ran in 48, the same year that Truman was running for president. And you know what a long shot Truman was. And I
Well,
was,
particularly, I don't. I was just a baby
well,
then.
he was anywhere from 50 to 101, and I was anywhere from 75 to 300 to win. But we both won. And I was reelected. In other words, I was in the state legislature for 10 years, but 2 of those years, I got beat one time there. And 2 of those years, I was administrative assistant to the minority leader. So that was a total of 10 years.
Who was the governor when you were up there?
Well, that was another thing. Lausche was who was defeated before that by Herbert. Lausche was elected governor. Bill Neal, was he a governor then?
Mm-hmm.
Bill O'Neill, a Republican, and then Mike DeSalle from Toledo. I think there was only 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's right. Lausche was the governor, and then he ran for the Senate and got elected. And he was a senator there for 4 or 6 years. So that's about the extent of it.
Okay. You're a retired teacher from,
School teacher. I retired in 71 from Ironton High School.
you're a retired engineer from the C&O
Yeah,
Railroad.
76. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And your hobbies are
Hobbies,
antiquing, I suppose.
antiquing,
Antiquing.
knitting, reading.
Have you been out of,
I've been out since 71. I've got 24 years of retirement now. Doesn't seem that long. I haven't done anything in that time either.
that seems impossible.
I'm 71. never missed a day of it. There hasn't been a day that I wish that I was back and I liked it while I was there. And I retired of my own wish. I wasn't up to retirement age. But after I was out of it, I never missed it at all. And I don't miss it.
Kids, that's hard to handle.
Yes, and when I retired, drugs were beginning to come in. And it was hard on older teachers. Much more than I think younger teachers understand things like that better than older teachers. We couldn't understand it. We couldn't accept even the thought of it. My first one with drugs, I was so shocked. It took me a long time to get over having a boy on drugs in class.
Yeah, that would have been bad. The 60s didn't do too much for us, did they?
But you know, about 10 years after that, I was up at Huntington to a program, at the Civic Center, and stopped at a filling station for gas, and it was late at night. Here came this boy, the first one I ever had on drugs, and he recognized me. He said, "Miss Seipel, I've been trying to find a way to find you, but I didn't know where you live." He said, "I wanted to tell you, I have gone back to church. I have 3 children. I'm married, have 3 children, and I wanted to apologize to you for the way I behaved in your class, because I was the first class after the lunch hour, and he was taking whatever he was taking. I never have understood all this. He was taking drugs during his lunch hour, and I got him the first class, and he was strung up on a wire to handle him. He was hard. He said, "I'm apologizing to you and telling
How
you
nice.
I straightened my life out," which
How
is
nice.
good.
You might have had a hand in it.
I don't know. It was just I'd been to the Civic Center, and you don't get out of there until about 11. It was late, and I went to get some gas to come home. And he came around the side of the car, and he said he'd been trying to find me. He didn't know where I lived, because he was Chesapeake. And he apologized.
How nice.
Yes, it was nice to know that one straightened out, anyhow.
Well, if you just help one, that's it.
He apologized.
Yeah, it got bad.
Oh, it was getting bad then. It was starting to, in the 70s. It's bad now.
Anything else you'd like to add? I'm sure there's lots of questions I got to ask. Can you think of any questions? Oh yeah, you never did finish how you met. We got one. You never did really finish how you met.
I don't think he knows. And
That
I don't know. I still think it was at a dance. Well, I did want to add one thing. For people who are interested in genealogy, in Salt Lake City is rather far to travel to. The best place in the United States, and they say it's second to Salt Lake City if you can't get there, is Fort Wayne, Indiana. And it's out at the library, the city library. It's right downtown. It's very easy to park down there, to find it, because it's downtown. And all you need to have when you go into Fort Wayne is the name of the county in which the people live that you are investigating, or the county in which they were born. That's the only thing they ask you for, is the county. Before they ever ask the state, they have to have a county. And then they go back and they get books of just that county, and they will look up the names for you. Then, if any of your relatives served in the Army or Navy, they have so many things on tape, and they'll take you to a machine and put the tape in for you and show you how to run it, and you can find their records. Or whoever's been in the service, like the Air Force, if you wanted, they would have that. And there's no charge for this. The only thing you need in Fort Wayne is the county. They won't do it by states. I couldn't say Minnesota. That wasn't enough for me. I had to say Steele County. And the minute you say the county, you'll get all the material, and the tables are long, and they have college or university students working there, and they'll come and help you.
How nice to
It's
know.
an interesting place to drive to, and it isn't far. It isn't far to drive to Fort Wayne. You just cross the Ohio line there. It isn't far at all. And it's right downtown. It was very easy to park. And they do all of that for you. If, like I said, they have one thing. It must be a county. It can't be a state.
Did you serve military?
Oh,
No. Mm-mm.
never called.
Okay, but
He was
Dad was
married.
I
in.
was close several times and kept putting me in hot water and it, I mean, you know, they'd say, well,
Registered.
but the progress of the war determined that they weren't going to call anyone anymore.
But Uncle Sam and Dad,
Yeah. Yeah.
They
It'll
were
be on
in.
these,
I served.
that will be on tape on a machine. And you just sit there and run the machine and read it. You can stop it and copy it in your notebook. You'll be there.
hmm,
You have to have some years, though.
Mhm.
I mean, you have to have a little foundation where they were stationed or, you know, which war and things like that. But yes, they do that for you. They have all the records. All the military records are there, and quite a bit of the Civil War, and I think a little bit of the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. Was Grandpa in the war? Any wars?
No,
No,
In military?
none of mine.
they were too young and too old. The First World War, what, about 16?
No, 1914 to 1917. I can remember World War I. The village in which I lived had so many German immigrants that were there to come to farm, and there was so much tension and hard feeling. They had a bonfire one night, and all of us in